Let's take a closer look at these shocking historical photos. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most? In July 1999, United States Marines guarded a Royal Canadian Mounted Police forensic team as it examined a suspected burial site in a Kosovo village. The investigators worked under armed protection while recording evidence that could help identify the people buried there. Isabella Ziegler was photographed on July 6, 1920, as she left Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for women after serving time for grand larceny. More than a century later, her direct stare and prisoner number 51333 make the release portrait feel strikingly modern. Orson Welles removes the heavy aging makeup after filming the final scene of Citizen Kane in 1940. The detailed layers transformed the 25-year-old director into an elderly Charles Foster Kane, allowing him to play the character across several decades. Martin Van Buren Bates, born in Kentucky in 1837, grew to about 7 feet 9 inches and became one of the most famous tall performers of the 19th century. After serving as a Confederate captain, he joined Phineas Taylor Barnum and later married Anna Haining Swan, another exceptionally tall performer. Portuguese runner Francisco Lazaro collapsed during the 1912 Stockholm Marathon and became the first athlete to pass away during a modern Olympic event. Reports say he covered his skin with animal fat to prevent sunburn, possibly limiting his body's ability to cool itself. On March 6, 1980, television presenter Jimmy Savile stood beside Margaret Thatcher at an event supporting the protection of children. Decades later, investigations revealed that Savile had used his fame and access to hide a long pattern of abuse, giving this photograph a disturbing contrast. On December 13, 1981, an armored personnel carrier stood outside Warsaw's Moscow Cinema as Poland entered martial law. Inside, the film Apocalypse Now was playing, creating one of history's most striking and accidental scenes of real life mirroring the screen. In 1939, a migrant girl and her mother were photographed in Washington's Yakima Valley, where families followed the harvest in search of seasonal farm work. Her hands gripping the fence captured the uncertainty of thousands who moved from one crop and temporary camp to the next. French veteran known only as Robin was photographed in 1918 after losing both hands during the First World War. This colorized portrait preserves a rare, direct record of the soldiers who returned home facing permanent injuries and an entirely new daily life. After France was liberated in 1944, women accused of helping German forces had their heads shaved and were marched through cheering crowds. These public punishments became known as the ugly carnivals and often happened before any formal investigation or trial. On July 13, 1943, 2 Japanese sailors rescued from the sunken cruiser Jinsu stood aboard the American destroyer USS Nicholas wearing spare United States Navy uniforms. Their exhausted faces captured the rare moment when enemies at sea became rescuers and survivors. This rare portrait may show Lindsay Birdseye, an American sideshow performer whose head was reportedly 48 inches around. Remembered as witty and cheerful, he loved music and learned to play several instruments, despite the condition that shaped his unusual appearance. In 1971, Brigitte Bardot was photographed riding a Yamaha 125 Enduro through the countryside of her famous La Madrague estate in France. The compact trail motorcycle showed a far more private and adventurous side of the screen icon than her carefully staged film portraits. This 1919 portrait shows members of the 369th Infantry Regiment, the Black New York unit remembered as the Harlem Hellfighters. Fighting alongside French forces, they earned widespread praise and returned home as one of the most celebrated American units of the First World War. On July 4, 1986, the McDonald's advertising blimp floated beside New York's World Trade Center during Independence Day celebrations. The small airship framed between the Twin Towers created one of the most surreal advertising photographs of the decade. In 1988, the Soviet frigate Bezavetny deliberately struck the United States cruiser Yorktown, during a tense passage through Soviet territorial waters. The close contact became one of the Cold War's most dramatic naval confrontations, yet both ships continued without a larger clash. On April 30, 1975, South Vietnamese troops stopped this North Vietnamese tank during one of the last clashes in Saigon, only hours before the city changed hands. The image captured the final day of the long conflict, as military resistance collapsed and a new chapter in Vietnam's history began. On July 13, 1944, soldiers of the United States 34th Infantry Division followed an Italian partisan through the shattered streets of Rosignano Marittimo. The ruined homes show how the fighting moved directly through ancient towns as Allied forces pushed north across Italy. In July 1969, Neil Armstrong photographed Buzz Aldrin walking across the moon during Apollo 11, the first mission to place humans on another world. Armstrong and the lunar module are reflected in Aldrin's visor, turning one frame into a complete portrait of the historic landing. During the Vietnam War, a soldier from the Tiger Division of South Korea gives water to an injured American ally inside a field position. South Korea sent more troops to Vietnam than any foreign nation except the United States, making this quiet moment part of a vast alliance. On October 6, 1972, brothers Ryszard and Jerzy Kowalczyk destroyed the Opole University Auditorium one day before a ceremony honoring Poland's security forces. They chose a time when the hall was empty, leaving no injuries and turning the ruined venue into a powerful protest against the communist government. In 1930, President Herbert Hoover stood on the White House lawn with contestants and winners of a national woodworking competition. The young builders displayed handmade furniture, toys, and models, turning the formal presidential grounds into an unusual exhibition of American skill and creativity. Greek actress Irene Papas was photographed as Helen of Troy during the filming of The Trojan Women in 1971. Her restrained costume and severe expression presented the legendary queen not as a romantic beauty, but as a powerful figure surrounded by blame and ruin. From December 7th to 9th, 1982, 15 prominent critics of Suriname's military government lost their lives in events that became known as the December Killings. The Netherlands then froze development aid, and Desi Bouterse accepted political responsibility in 2007. Between 1946 and 1948, United States health researchers exposed people in Guatemala to serious infections without informed consent, while testing whether penicillin could prevent them. The secret program remained hidden for more than 60 years and was only revealed in 2010, leading to an official apology. In 1864, frontier showman Seth Kinman posed beside weapons, animal hides, and objects he claimed were Native American artifacts. Near the center lies what appears to be a human scalp, revealing how frontier violence was turned into public entertainment. On February 12, 1952, a researcher in Spaarnwoude, the Netherlands, sorted hundreds of pottery fragments recovered from a Roman-era excavation. Each piece was matched by shape, color, and curve, helping archaeologists rebuild vessels and uncover details of daily life nearly 2,000 years earlier. On March 4, 1865, Abraham Lincoln delivered his second inaugural address at the United States Capitol, calling for unity as the Civil War neared its end. In the crowd above him stood John Wilkes Booth, the man who would assassinate Lincoln just 41 days later. In 1898, the Seattle Hotel and T. Lubelski General Store stood at Sheep Camp, a fast-growing stop on Alaska's Chilkoot Trail during the Klondike Gold Rush. Tens of thousands of travelers passed through this muddy settlement, buying food, medicine, clothing, and tools before climbing toward the gold fields. Medicine Bottle, also known as Wakan Ojanjan, was photographed while held at Fort Snelling after the United States-Dakota War of 1862. Accused of taking part in the uprising, he was among the Dakota prisoners whose fate was decided by federal authorities. This photograph is often misidentified as a 1931 meeting between Jewish leaders and Italian fascists over British rule in Palestine. It more likely shows members of the radical Brit Habrionim movement being escorted by police in Jerusalem in 1933 after an anti-British protest. In 1979, British Rail imagined London without commuter trains, replacing them with highways packed around Big Ben. The warning claimed the city would need about 120 extra road lanes, yet central London would still struggle to hold hundreds of thousands of cars. On June 24, 1940, Alpini soldiers of Italy's Trento Battalion climbed through deep snow toward the French forts near Col de la Fourche. Carrying heavy packs and weapons across steep mountain ground, they advanced during the final days of the campaign in the Alps. In June 1940, a soldier of Italy's 7th Alpini Regiment rested inside a military vehicle during the campaign in France. Wrapped in a heavy blanket but still wearing his marked helmet, he shows the exhaustion faced by mountain troops after moving through cold, steep alpine terrain. During the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, a British soldier guarded a long line of Italian prisoners behind a simple wire barrier. His relaxed stride contrasts with the crowded group, capturing how quickly entire units surrendered as Allied forces moved across the island. At the Nuremberg trials in 1946, former Reichsbank President Walter Funk faced evidence that his bank handled jewelry and dental gold taken from concentration camp prisoners. Prosecutors said these valuables funded the Nazi state, while Funk denied knowing what entered the vaults. In May 1937, thousands of pedestrians crossed the newly opened Golden Gate Bridge before cars were allowed onto the roadway. Aircraft flew between its towers during the celebration, creating one of the bridge's most dramatic early photographs. In Okinawa in 1945, an American serviceman stopped to share part of his field ration with 2 local children during the final months of the Pacific War. The photograph captures a rare moment of trust and kindness on an island where civilians faced hunger, fear, and widespread destruction. Near Edirne, during the First Balkan War of 1912 and 1913, Bulgarian soldiers built giant snow bears while waiting between military duties. The playful sculptures created a surreal scene, showing how even troops in a harsh winter campaign found strange ways to escape boredom. On September 10, 1886, Native American prisoners were photographed beside a Southern Pacific train near the Nueces River in Texas. Seated beneath the rail cars under armed guard, they were being transported far from their homeland during the final years of the frontier wars. In February 1945, German Panzer Grenadiers in Guben watched a Soviet T-3485 that had been disabled at close range with a Panzerfaust. The scene shows how handheld anti-tank weapons had become vital as Soviet armored forces pushed deeper into Germany. In 1953, Jerry Smith won the Lady Loggers contest at the Timber Days Festival in Sutherland, Oregon, by cutting through a huge log with a chainsaw before a crowd. Her performance turned a demanding forestry skill into one of the festival's most exciting public events. In 1921, Tulsa's Greenwood district, known as Black Wall Street, was devastated across roughly 35 city blocks during one of the worst outbreaks of racial violence in United States history. This photograph shows a man walking through the ruins where only twisted metal and iron bed frames remained among the destroyed homes and businesses. On March 3, 1991, United States Marines captured this Iraqi Air Force Bell Tu-14 transport helicopter during the final days of the Gulf War. Still marked with Iraqi colors, the aircraft became a rare prize from a conflict dominated by fast-moving ground forces and overwhelming air power. On April 5, 1932, large crowds gathered outside Finnish alcohol shops as the country ended 13 years of prohibition following a national vote. Legal sales began at exactly 10 in the morning, creating the famous countdown date and time, 5th day, 4th month, year 32 at 10. On July 8, 1956, Belgrade presented its first public wireless television broadcast, marking a major step in Yugoslavia's move into the television age. The sign announced 2 daily viewing periods, and crowds gathered to watch a technology that was still rare in private homes. After Sammy Davis Jr. lost his left eye in a car accident in 1954, friends at a party wore matching eye patches so he would not feel singled out. The photograph captures him laughing during recovery, turning a painful moment into an unforgettable show of friendship and support. In 1995, a Cadillac DeVille was photographed in front of the heavily damaged presidential palace in Grozny during the First Chechen War. The polished American luxury car against the ruined government building created one of the conflict's most surreal contrasts. In 1918, 17 American soldiers were carried beneath enormous United States flags during a funeral procession in Vladivostok. They belonged to the American force sent into Siberia during the Russian Civil War, a little-known campaign thousands of miles from home. In April 1968, Washington erupted in unrest after the death of Martin Luther King Jr., and fires swept through several neighborhoods as thousands of National Guard troops entered the city. More than 1,000 buildings were damaged, leaving smoke-filled streets and entire business districts in ruins. During a 1968 heat wave, London's Tower Bridge overheated and became stuck open for nearly 2 hours, blocking road traffic across the Thames. Fire crews used powerful water jets from a boat below to cool the metal structure until the bridge could finally close again. In the mid-1940s, carnival performer Frank Kiefer posed in Idaho Falls while carrying a twisting mass of live snakes across his arms and shoulders. He worked with the Seabrand Brothers Carnival, where dangerous animal acts were used to draw crowds long before modern safety rules. During the Second World War, millions of British children were sent away from major cities to escape air raids, often living for years with unfamiliar families. This photograph captures evacuees returning to London and running into the arms of parents they had not seen for months or even years. In 1918, a tethered observation balloon was flown above the British battleship HMS Queen Elizabeth to help crews see farther and correct naval gunfire. From high above the deck, the observer could spot targets and shell impacts that were impossible to track clearly from the ship alone. In 1914, German soldiers turned a farmer's house into a fortified position, digging trenches through the floor and using the windows as protected observation points. The photograph shows how quickly ordinary homes near the front could become hidden military strongholds. In 1989, Vladimir Putin was photographed in East Germany while serving as an officer of the Soviet intelligence service. Stationed in Dresden, he witnessed the collapse of East Germany before returning home and beginning the political rise that would reshape Russia. Around 1850, Broadway was already New York's busiest commercial street, lined with hotels, theaters, banks, and stores. Horse-drawn vehicles moved through a road crowded with construction, goods, and pedestrians as Manhattan rapidly grew into America's largest city. On July 22, 1966, the Polish People's Army displayed a tracked launcher carrying the R-11M Zemlya tactical missile during a major state parade in Warsaw. The enormous vehicle was designed to move and launch the missile quickly, turning the celebration into a powerful display of Cold War military strength. In 1943, United States and Danish personnel examined equipment abandoned by a German weather team after it escaped an Allied raid in Greenland. Hidden Arctic stations collected forecasts that could influence aircraft routes, naval movements, and convoy operations across the North Atlantic. In 1941, German troops in Smolensk turned disabled Soviet tanks into oversized road signs, painting arrows and destinations directly onto their armor. The strange scene shows how abandoned military equipment was quickly reused to guide columns through the captured city. In 1963, Checkpoint Charlie was Berlin's best-known crossing between the American and Soviet sectors, but ordinary East German citizens could not use it. That year, Austrian Heinz Speith drove his girlfriend Margaret Herrmann beneath the barrier in a low Austin Healey, forcing officials to lower barriers across the city. During the August 1991 coup attempt in Moscow, protesters dragged trolley buses onto Novinsky Boulevard to build a barricade against possible troop movement. The improvised blockade became one of the defining images of the Soviet Union's final crisis, as ordinary citizens turned city transport into a shield for the Russian parliament. In 1923, Saidiniso Shakirova was photographed at the controls of a tractor in Kokand, becoming one of Uzbekistan's earliest female tractor drivers. At a time when few women entered mechanized work, the image captured a remarkable break with old social boundaries. In 1912, the three-masted schooner Mildred ran onto the rocks near Gurnard's Head in Cornwall while carrying industrial slag from Newport to London. Its torn sails and half-submerged hull created a haunting scene as the abandoned vessel slowly disappeared beneath the waves. Unveiled in Magnitogorsk in 1979, the rear-to-front memorial shows a steelworker handing an enormous sword to a soldier. Sculptor Lev Golovnitsky designed the scene to honor the factory workers whose metal and labor supplied the Soviet military during the Second World War. In the summer of 1945, thousands of military jeeps were gathered in enormous disposal fields across liberated Europe after the war had ended. Vehicles that had carried soldiers, supplies, and messages across the front suddenly became surplus, creating endless rows of unused machines. In 1990, a young Eritrean sat on a spent aerial bomb after an air raid on the Red Sea port of Massawa during the final phase of Eritrea's independence war. His exhausted pose beside the enormous shell became a striking image of civilians living among the remains of modern warfare. In 1946, a former German prisoner of war returned to Munich and slept beside the ruins of the building where his apartment once stood. The photograph captured the brutal reality of coming home after years away, only to find that home had vanished. On January 15, 1965, the Soviet Union used an underground nuclear device in Kazakhstan for Project Chagan, an experiment meant to create a large artificial reservoir. The blast moved millions of tons of earth and left a vast crater that was later filled with river water to form Lake Chagan. After the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, the Russian battleship Oriol showed the scars of between 76 and 140 shell impacts. Japan repaired and modernized the captured ship, then placed it in the Imperial Japanese Navy under the new name Iwami. In March 1942, a German Junkers Ju-52 was destroyed by fire at an airfield during the massive effort to supply troops surrounded near Demyansk. The operation relied on hundreds of transport flights through winter weather and enemy fire, proving that an entire trapped force could be sustained from the air. In the 1920s, a woman confidently posed on an early Harley-Davidson motorcycle, a machine still rare and expensive for most people. Her relaxed smile and modern riding clothes captured a time when female motorcyclists were challenging social expectations and claiming new freedom on the road. In 1927, young women in Madrid gathered for a contest celebrating the most beautiful natural hair, with several wearing it almost to the floor. Before short modern styles became common, such extraordinary length was seen as a powerful symbol of elegance, patience, and femininity. On August 26, 1944, a French woman raised her fist at a portrait of Adolf Hitler beside an American Willys Jeep in newly liberated Paris. Photographed one day after German forces surrendered the city, the scene captured the anger and relief of people emerging from 4 years of occupation. In February 1945, damaged American landing vehicles and equipment covered the shore of Iwo Jima after the difficult amphibious assault. Mount Suribachi rises in the distance, showing how exposed the beaches were as troops moved inland under constant pressure. In 1962, far-right politician Oswald Mosley was struck by an unidentified protester moments after arriving to speak at a rally on Ridley Road in London. Local residents and anti-fascist demonstrators quickly surrounded the gathering, forcing it to collapse before Mosley could properly address the crowd. In 1951, United Nations airborne units dropped soldiers, weapons, and supplies by parachute into Korea during a major operation behind enemy lines. Hundreds of parachutes filled the sky at once, turning the mountain valley below into a vast landing zone within minutes. On January 15, 1919, a giant storage tank in Boston burst and released more than 2 million gallons of molasses into the north end. The thick wave moved faster than many people could run, smashing buildings, lifting vehicles, and leaving streets buried under sticky syrup. This photograph from China in the 1960s or 1970s shows several generations of one family posing with rifles and traditional weapons. Even the youngest children stand beside the adults, revealing how deeply militia culture and political campaigns entered everyday family life. Between 1914 and 1917, workers at the Ijora plant in Kolpino fitted cars with heavy steel armor for the Imperial Russian Army. Civilian chassis were transformed into early armored vehicles, showing how quickly factories adapted to the demands of modern warfare. In 1929, Czech surrealist artists Jindřich Styrsky and Toyen wore oversized goggles and protective masks while working with paints that released harmful fumes. Their strange laboratory-like appearance makes the photograph look futuristic, though it was simply an early attempt at safer studio work. In 1871, during the Paris Commune, the statue of Napoleon I was pulled down in Place Vendôme as a symbol of rejection of empire and war. The shattered monument drew crowds immediately, turning the square into one of the clearest scenes of revolutionary Paris breaking with its past. After the fighting around Casablanca in November 1942, the unfinished French battleship Jean Bart sat heavily damaged in port after facing American naval fire. Despite its condition, the ship survived, was later completed, and eventually entered service with the French Navy. In the early 1900s, a crowd gathered around a massive hippopotamus after a hunt in German East Africa. The animal's enormous size turned the riverbank into a public spectacle, showing how colonial hunting expeditions often became events for entire local communities. This secret Soviet photograph shows the armored capsule of a ZIS-115 government car after testing in the 1940s. Designed to protect top officials while still looking like an ordinary ZIS-110 from the outside, the hidden steel body absorbed multiple test hits across its side panels and doors. On December 12, 1940, families who lost their homes during air raids slept inside the caves beneath Hastings in southern England. Some brought beds, tables, and personal belongings underground, turning the ancient tunnels into temporary bedrooms, play areas, and small homes. On March 21, 1962, a female bear named Yogi was launched in an ejection capsule in the United States at about 1,400 kilometers per hour and an altitude of 10 kilometers. After 7 minutes and 49 seconds, she landed safely, setting a new test record for both speed and height. In 1912, Czech satirist Jaroslav Hasek and his friend Zdeněk Kudej posed in women's bathing suits while swimming in the Vltava River near Nový Jakimov. The absurd scene perfectly matched Hasek's rebellious humor years before he created the famous soldier Svejk. In 1945, Japanese women and teenagers bowed as special attack pilots rode by truck toward an airfield for their final missions. The pilots saluted from the truck, creating a haunting farewell shaped by wartime propaganda, duty, and the knowledge that few were expected to return. In April 1971, a Vietnam veteran threw his decorated military jacket toward the United States Capitol during a major protest in Washington. Hundreds of former servicemen returned medals and ribbons that day, using the symbols of their service to publicly reject the conflict they had fought in. Days after Augusto Pinochet seized power in Chile in 1973, children copied the detentions and body searches they saw around them, while an armed soldier stood nearby. The photograph shows how quickly military rule entered everyday life, turning the fear and tension of the streets into a children's game. In 1969, Benjamin Hoskins Paddock appeared on the FBI wanted list after escaping federal custody and living under several false names. The convicted bank robber remained hidden for years before his capture, making this one of the Bureau's most unsettling fugitive posters. In 1960, researchers photographed Costa Rica's mysterious stone spheres, some weighing up to 16 tons and shaped with remarkable precision centuries before modern machinery. Their original purpose remains unknown, with theories linking them to astronomy, social status, or boundaries between ancient communities. In 1944, Soviet and American servicemen played volleyball together in Poltava, Ukraine, during a rare period of close cooperation between the two armies. The relaxed match offered a brief escape from military duties and captured an alliance that would disappear soon after the war. On April 29, 1975, desperate crowds climbed the walls of the United States Embassy in Saigon, hoping to reach one of the final evacuation helicopters. During Operation Frequent Wind, thousands of Americans and South Vietnamese allies were flown out as the city's remaining escape routes closed and the government neared collapse. On May 29, 1937, the German warship Deutschland burned off Spain after two Republican aircraft, flown by Soviet volunteers, struck it during the Civil War. The pilots reportedly mistook the ship for the rebel cruiser Canarias, turning a split-second error into a major international crisis. In September 1945, children in Berlin's British sector lined up in a Charlottenburg schoolyard for soup, carrying bowls, pots, and any container they could find. Many were barefoot and visibly underfed, showing how hunger and strict rationing shaped everyday life in the ruined city only months after the war ended. In 1954, physicist Edward Teller discussed a theoretical 10-gigaton device called sundial, roughly 200 times more powerful than the later Tsar Bomba. It was never built, but the proposal revealed how far Cold War planners were willing to push nuclear power beyond anything ever tested. In 1978, Scottish journalist Malcolm Caldwell visited Cambodia as a committed defender of the Khmer Rouge and received a private audience with Pol Pot. Only hours after the meeting, Caldwell was found dead in Phnom Penh under circumstances that remain disputed, turning his final trip into one of the regime's strangest mysteries. In 1977, the American Civil Liberties Union defended the free speech rights of neo-Nazis who planned to march through Skokie, Illinois, home to many Holocaust survivors. The bitter legal battle helped inspire the creation of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, turning public outrage into a lasting place of memory and education. During the German occupation of France, a soldier was photographed helping a young French woman learn to ride a bicycle while his companions watched and laughed. The light-hearted scene creates a striking contrast with the tension and uncertainty that shaped daily life under occupation. In 1939, a young girl in Crystal City, Texas, prepared to wash dishes in a crowded kitchen lined with reused cans, jars, and paper-wrapped supplies. Her worn clothing and serious expression reveal the quiet daily labor expected from children in many working families during the Great Depression. In February 1972, a Westland Wasp helicopter hovered above the nuclear submarine HMS Courageous during a violent North Atlantic storm to evacuate a sick sailor. The pilot had to hold the small aircraft almost motionless over the rolling submarine while waves repeatedly swept across its deck. In December 1942, the American cruiser New Orleans hid beneath heavy camouflage at Tulagi after a torpedo tore away everything forward of turret number 2. Despite losing almost one-third of the ship, the crew built a temporary bow from coconut logs and sailed her to Australia for repairs. Ira Hayes, a Native American Marine, became famous as one of the men raising the United States flag on Iwo Jima in 1945. Celebrated across the country as a hero, he struggled deeply after returning home and died in Arizona in 1955 at only 32. In June 2001, Houston police officers stood outside Andrea Yates's home in Clear Lake City after her 5 children were found dead inside. One officer covers his face, capturing the visible shock surrounding a family tragedy that soon became known across the United States. In 1954, diving clown Bob Smith married Aquamaid Mary Beth Sanger underwater at Aquarina Springs in San Marcos, Texas. Guests watched through glass as the couple exchanged vows beneath the surface, turning a wedding into one of the park's strangest public shows. These are among the last known photographs of Belgian financier Alfred Lowenstein, one of the world's richest men, boarding his private aircraft in 1928. During the flight from England to Belgium, he entered the rear cabin and vanished from the plane, leaving behind a mystery that remains debated today. In December 1988, rows of coffins filled Lockerbie Town Hall after Pan Am Flight 103 was destroyed above the Scottish town, taking 270 lives in the air and on the ground. The photograph captures the scale of the disaster, which remains the deadliest terrorist attack in United Kingdom history. After the 1964 premiere of A Hard Day's Night, Ringo Starr and George Harrison danced with their mothers at London's Dorchester Hotel. The joyful family moment showed the Beatles as sons celebrating with the women who knew them long before worldwide fame. In 1979, 2 East German families secretly built a homemade hot air balloon from fabric and household materials to escape across the border. 8 people flew for 28 freezing minutes in an open metal basket before landing safely in West Germany, only about 10 kilometers beyond the frontier. In 1985, Jeremy Bamber was arrested after his parents, sister, and her 6-year-old twin sons were found dead at their farmhouse in Essex. He first blamed his sister Sheila, but investigators uncovered contradictions in his story, and he was later convicted of all 5 deaths. In 1883, 3 native boys were photographed entering the Carlisle Indian School, and again 3 years later in uniforms with cut hair. The portraits show how the school replaced their clothing, language, and traditions with imposed American customs. Ken Ito, known as Tokyo Joe, became the highest-ranking Asian American figure in Chicago, organized crime, and controlled major gambling operations. In 1983, he survived a close-range mob attack meant to silence him, then became a government witness and helped convict former associates. In 1904, sisters Emma and Mamie Gerhard photographed Geronimo at the St. Louis World's Fair, creating one of his most detailed surviving portraits. In 2009, a Library of Congress conservator enlarged the image and discovered one sister reflected as a tiny figure inside his eye. In 1911, a starving man, later called Ishi, emerged near Oroville, California, and was identified as the last known member of the Yahi people. He spent his final years teaching researchers his language, tools, and traditions before dying from tuberculosis in 1916. In January 1973, a police marksman searched the roof of New Orleans' Howard Johnson Hotel from a borrowed Marine helicopter during the final hours of a 7-day manhunt for Mark Essex. The crisis had already taken 10 lives and injured 13 people before officers ended the rooftop siege. Josefa and Rosa Blazek were famous conjoined twins who performed musical acts across Europe while wearing matching costumes like these. Rosa later gave birth to a son named Franz, and both sisters helped raise him before the 3 began appearing together on stage. John Rogan, known as Bud, was one of the tallest men ever recorded and used a custom wheelchair because ankylosis limited movement in his legs and feet. He built a small cart that his goats could pull and earned money by selling his own drawings instead of appearing in sideshows. In 1956, Lieutenant Jacques Chirac posed beside an American-made Patton tank while serving with the French Army in Algeria. Nearly 40 years later, the smiling young officer in this photograph became President of France and remained in office for 12 years. On September 5, 1917, 8 French soldiers covered a massive 370-millimeter railway howitzer with camouflage near Noyon, France. The heavy net was designed to break up its outline from the air, hiding one of the most powerful artillery weapons of the First World War. In 1941, Soviet women covered a Yakovlev Yak, one fighter with straw and netting to hide it from aircraft searching the airfield from above. Photographer Emanuel Evzarikin captured how civilians helped protect frontline planes using simple materials gathered from the surrounding fields. On September 25, 1943, scouts from Captain Ushakov's unit moved along the Dnieper River after Soviet forces retook Smolensk. Framed by smoke, broken walls, and the city's cathedral, the photograph captures soldiers entering a place transformed by 2 years of occupation. German soldiers aimed through narrow firing ports inside a heavily reinforced trench near the Belgian frontier during the First World War. Thick timber supports and deep earth walls protected the men while allowing them to watch and fire without fully exposing themselves. In 1915, Russian soldiers on the Eastern Front wore early protective masks while carrying American-made Winchester Model 1895 rifles. Russia ordered nearly 300,000 of these lever-action weapons, specially chambered for the same ammunition used by its standard military rifle. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?